Hello friends, in today's class we'll be discussing about the results of First World War or the impact of First World War on international relations. First World War is the first ever world war that was held between 1914 to 1918. Though European powers are responsible for the First World War, many countries of the other continents, Asian countries, African countries, North American countries, South American countries, countries of Australian continent have also participated in the war. That's why it is called as the first ever world war. The First World War was between 1914 to 1918. It was the first ever world war, and before that there were local wars within each continent, within different countries. That was called as local wars. But for the first time, at a global level, First World War was held between 1914 to 1918. This war was there for almost 4.5 years, and this war has brought so much of devastation into human civilization. Millions of people have lost their life, and millions of families have separated, and many of them are displaced, and millions of pounds of worth of properties are also damaged during the First World War. So First World War is a very tragic incident in the human history, which is held in the first part of the 20th century. No other war in the human history is as big as First World War till 1919. So that's what is called the first ever global war. That's First World War. First World War broke out in 1914 on June 28, when Austria-Hungary gave an ultimatum to Serbia and declared a war against Serbia. First, all the countries felt that it's a local war. But in course of time, it assumed larger proportions, and many of the countries have joined in it. That's how it has become a world war. So it ended in 1918 in the month of November. So the World War, the First World War was there for almost 4.5 years. Millions of people have lost their lives. Though European countries were responsible for the World War, many countries of other continents were also participated in the war. In Europe, there are countries like empires, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Turkish Empire, the Russian Empire, the British Empire, and the French Empire. There were 3 old empires and 3 new empires. And these empires were fighting among themselves for claiming the power of the status of a superpower to control the European politics and also the world politics. So that's how every country thought that it only is capable of controlling the whole world politics. And they want to control the world politics in general and European politics in particular. The 3 world empires that were there in Europe during the first 2 decades of 20th century were the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Turkish Empire. These are the 3 empires. And the 3 new empires were there: Russian Empire, British Empire, and French Empire. So this is how all the countries of the Europe are responsible for the war. There was a scramble for colonialism and colonial domination in Asia and Africa by European powers. All the European powers, Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, Netherlands, Germany, Italy, fought with each other, both at the European level and also outside the Europe. In Asia, they fought with each other in controlling the colonies. In Africa, they fought with each other. In South American continent, they fought with each other. So this is how the European powers were largely responsible for the First World War. But in course of time, when the war progressed, a lot of other countries of other continents, the Asian countries, the African countries, the South American countries, the countries of Australian continent, have also joined in the war. That's how it has assumed the proportion of a world war. It's the very first time that a global level war occurred. That's why it is called as the First World War. Though European countries were responsible for the World War, many countries of other continents also participated in the war. The First World War was held between two mighty military alliances. These alliances are led by certain superpowers of Europe. There are two different military alliances. One is called as the Central Powers. Previously, it was called as a triple entity. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. These are the three countries that led the Central Powers. They are called as the Central Powers. And against the Central Powers, there is another military alliance led by UK, France, Russia, and America. This is called Allied Powers. So the war was held between Central Powers and Allied Powers. The Central Powers are mostly under the domination of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. And Allied Powers were dominated by Britain, that's called United Kingdom, France, Russia, and America, USA. In fact, America has joined the war at a later period of time in 1917, but UK, France, and Russia were the beginners of the Allied powers, and they have threatened Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. That means the Central Powers. And these three powers, UK, France, and Russia, are called as Allied powers. So these are the two broad alliances, and all the other countries of the world have polarized, either in favor of Central Powers or in favor of Allied powers. That's how two strategic military alliances were constructed, were established to fight with each other. Though the war started at a local level in Europe, later it assumed the world proportion and has become a world war with the entry of many countries of many continents. So the war was held between two military alliances, the Central Powers and the Allied powers, and Central Powers being Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey, and Allied powers being United Kingdom, that's called Britain, France, Russia, and USA. And at the end of war in 1918, the American President Woodrow Wilson, who has brought all the warring parties to a peace proposal with his 14 points. So Woodrow Wilson's 14 points became the rallying point or becoming the basis for the end of First World War. In fact, European powers have quarreled with each other for so many centuries. There were competitions, there were quarrels, there were disputes, there were wars, there were conquests, there were annexations among the European powers for so many centuries. But for the first time, an outside element that's called USA, United States of America, has interfered in the matters of Europe and tried to bring peace after the First World War. So this has occurred in the form of Woodrow Wilson's 14 proposals. The 14 points of Woodrow Wilson became the basis for the end of First World War. We must know that Woodrow Wilson was the former American president at the time of First World War. So he was very active, and he has brought all the warring countries, Germany, Italy, France, Britain, Russia, and other countries to the peace table, and he has put forth his 14 points as peace proposal, and that resulted ultimately in the end of the First World War after a disastrous war of course of 4.5 years. So Woodrow Wilson's 14 points became the basis for the end of the First World War. And the immediate reason for the immediate result of the First World War is the loss of lives of millions of people. People have died, innocent persons, people have died, and also thousands of thousands, military people, army, navy, artillery, people who were involved in these activities have lost their lives, and property worth millions of pounds damaged, and millions of families were separated, and millions of people have displaced from their native homes, and some of the families have even migrated to other countries for fear of insecurity. So this is how it has brought insecurity, it has caused death, it has damaged the properties of the people. Millions of people lost their lives, and property worth millions of pounds damaged, and millions of families were separated and migrated to other countries with the fear of insecurity among themselves. So this is the devastation that World War remained. In today's class, we'll be discussing about the effects or the results of the First World War. We have a lesson plan here. First of all, we must discuss about the military alliances in the war. After that, we must know the immediate cause of the war. After that, what are the factors that contributed for entering into war by different countries? What are the factors of Austria-Hungary, Serbia, Russia, England, France, and how these countries entered into the war is another important aspect. And after that, briefly, we'll be knowing about the causes of the First World War. What are the causes for the First World War? And after that, we'll be knowing about the impact of First World War. As an impact of First World War, 4 major empires have crumbled down. The German Empire, led by Hohenzollern dynasties, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, held by Habsburg dynasty, the Romanov dynasty of Russia, and the Ottoman Empire, led by Khalifa, crumbled down during First World War. So as a result of First World War, many countries have seen insecurity, and at least 4 major empires have crumbled down. And likewise, as an impact of First World War, the Paris Peace Treaty, which is also known as the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was signed between the defeated powers and the victorious powers. And Germany has stated this as a very humiliating treaty dictated to it by the victorious powers. So the Paris Peace Treaty, which is also known as the Treaty of Versailles, is also signed. And as a result of First World War, the League of Nations was established. League of Nations is the first world government to prevent any other world war in future. So League of Nations was formed on the principle of collective security. So establishment of League of Nations is also another important outcome of the First World War. And growth of nationalism in Asia and Africa. All the countries of Asia, Africa, and South America became very conscious of their nationalism, and there were nationalist movements in various countries. So growth of nationalism in Asia and Africa is also another important impact of First World War. And as a result of First World War, great economic depression occurred between 1929 to 1935. So this great economic depression has virtually crippled all the economies of the European powers. And European powers are pushed to the debt. And this debt trap is mostly due to the results of the First World War. And people have lost their purchasing power, and the growth circle has stopped. As a result of First World War, all the production units of many of the industries have stopped down, and this has resulted in loss of jobs for millions of workers and middle classes. And this has indirectly impacted the purchasing power of the people. So this is how the Great Economic Depression occurred between 1929 to 1935. It means 10 years after the First World War, the Great Economic Depression has occurred. And as a result of the Great Economic Depression and First World War, 2 major dictatorships rise in Europe. One is led by Mussolini, Benito Mussolini in Italy. The other one is led by Adolf Hitler in Germany. So rise of Nazism and fascism. These are the 2 important dictatorships rose in the interwar periods in Europe, particularly in Germany and Italy. And First World War has led to loss of life, displacement, and damages of property. After that, we'll make a critical evaluation of the lesson. So, First World War. There are two military alliances in the First World War. As I have been telling you from the beginning, the First World War is held between two important military alliances. They are the Central Powers and the Allied Powers. The Central Powers are led by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. These are the three countries that have led the Central Powers. And there is also another important military alliance that is led by Britain, France, Russia, and America. Of course, America is a late entrant, but Britain, France, and Russia led alliance, which ultimately America also entered into. So these are the two military alliances. They are only Eurocentric alliances. In course of time, other countries of the world, Asian countries, African countries, Latin American countries, also have joined into these alliances, either in Central Powers or in Allied Powers. So this is how there are two major important military alliances or the strategic alliances that conducted the war. In fact, the military alliance led by Austria-Hungary, Turkey, and Germany is called as the Central Powers, and this is seen as mostly responsible for the war. And in response to the threats given by the Central Powers, the Allied Powers also make an alliance among themselves and entered into the war. So these military alliances occurred in the First World War between Central Powers and Allied Powers. The Central Powers are led by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey, and Allied Powers are led by Britain, that's called United Kingdom, France, Russia, and United States, USG. These are the two broad military alliances that have conducted the war for almost 4.5 years. What is the immediate cause of the war? The immediate cause of the war being shooting of Prince of Austria-Hungary, Francis Ferdinand, and his wife in Bosnian capital Sarajevo by a guerrilla princip who belonged to a secret organization called Narodna Obrana. This was held on June 28, 1914. In fact, Turkey has given two districts, Bosnia and Herzegovina, to Austria-Hungary Empire. So these are the two districts given by Turkey to Austria-Hungarian Empire. The people of these two districts do not belong to either Austrian nationalities or Hungarian nationality. They belong to Serbian nationality. All the people of these two districts, many of the people of these two districts belong to the Serbian nationalities, and they want to join in Serbia instead of joining in Austria and Hungary. But Turkey forcefully gave these two districts to Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary wanted to retain these two districts by hook or crook, and it used all its force for the retention of these two districts within its empire. So these have become the part of Bosnia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. Bosnia and Herzegovina, these are the two districts. And the capital of Bosnia is Sarajevo. And the Austrian prince, the Austria-Hungary prince, Francis Ferdinand, made a visit to these two districts, Bosnia and Herzegovina. When he was making a visit to these two districts, a person belonging to a secret organization, indirectly helped by the Serbian government, that organization, secret organization called Narodna Obrana, and that man is called Gavrilo Princip. He shot the prince and his wife. Francis Ferdinand and his wife were shot dead in the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. This has triggered the war. In fact, all the countries have prepared themselves for a war. Maybe all the countries thought it would be a local war. And there was growing militarism, and all the countries were equipped with soldiers, artillery, navy, and everything. But this incident has ignited the tensions among the powers, and which ultimately resulted in First World War. So the immediate cause of the war is the Prince of Austria-Hungary, Francis Ferdinand, and his wife were shot at Sarajevo, it's a Bosnian capital, by Gavrilo Princip, belonged to a secret organization of Serbia, and that organization is called Narodna Obrana in 1914, June 28. So this is the incident on which the Austria-Hungary sought explanation from Serbia, and it gave an ultimatum to Serbia that if it cannot give satisfactory explanation for the shooting down of its own prince by a Serbian national, war will be declared. And this ultimatum has ultimately led to the basis for the First World War. So the war started between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. And Serbia was supported by Russia. Austria-Hungary was supported by Germany. So this is how all the countries have come either on the side of Austria-Hungary or on the side of Serbia. This is how the European dispute on an incident triggered a world-scale war with the joining of almost all the countries of the world either on the side of Serbia or on the side of Austria-Hungary. In fact, the Prince of Austria-Hungary, Francis Ferdinand, and his wife were shot dead at Sarajevo, the Bosnian capital, by Gavrilo Princip, who belonged to a secret organization called Narodna Obrana. And Gavrilo Princip is a Serbian national. So this incident has triggered the World War. This is the immediate cause for the First World War. And various factors contributed for the entering into the war. There are various reasons for various countries for entering into the war. Austria-Hungary has a reason, Serbia has a reason, Russia has a reason, England has a reason, France has a reason, USA has a reason, likewise Turkey has a reason by itself. So all the countries have entered with one reason or the other and entered into the war. In fact, this war is basically between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. Basically, it was a war between Serbia and Austria-Hungary with the shooting down of Austria-Hungarian Prince Francis Ferdinand by a Serbian national. But this war was not localized. It has assumed global proportions with the entry of many superpowers of Europe, either on the side of Austria-Hungary or on the side of Serbia. So the war started between Austria-Hungary on the one side and Serbia on the other side. Russia supported Serbia. Russia supported Serbia in the war. And France entered into war again on Serbia's side. And when Austria-Hungary and Serbia are fighting with each other, Turkey entered into the war on the side of Austria-Hungary. So the First World War started with Austria-Hungary on one side and Serbia on the other side. Later, Austria-Hungary was supported by Germany and Turkey, and Serbia was supported by Russia, England, and France. Later, USA also entered into it. Why Russia entered into the war? Because there is a secret pact between Serbia and Russia. Whenever a war occurs in Serbia, Russia will come to its fold, its assistance. That is the secret pact. And when Serbia faced the war with Austria-Hungary, Russia promptly entered into the war. When Austria-Hungary and Serbia were fighting with each other and Russia entered into the war, Germany also entered into the war on the side of Austria-Hungary. When Germany entered into war on the side of Austria-Hungary, France entered into the war in favor of Serbia and Russia. So this is how all the countries were polarized. In the meantime, Germany wanted to attack France, and Germany wanted the Belgium to give a route to attack France. There is a short route between Germany and France via Belgium. So it wanted the Belgian government to give permission for all its forces to enter into France via Belgium. But Belgium, being a neutral country, it denied permission to Germany. As a result, German forces forcefully entered into Belgium, and thereby they have passed through Belgium and entered into France. So that's how the Belgium neutrality was jeopardized, And as a result of German neutrality violation, England entered into the war against Germany in favor of Serbia, Russia, and France. This is how England entered into the war. In fact, there is also a long issue between Germany and France. In 1870, when Germany was united, before that it was called as Prussia, there is a war between France and Prussia that's called Franco-Prussian War. In a Franco-Prussian War, Prussia was victorious, and as a result, Prussia became Germany. And in the Franco-Prussian War, two prosperous areas of France, that's called Alsace and Lorraine, and Alsace-Lorraine were captured by Germany. So Germany caught hold of these two areas and annexed these two areas into Germany, and which are very mineral rich, which provide rich iron ore, raw iron ore to the country wherever it is a part. So this is how these two areas, particularly the Alsace and Lorraine, which were very prosperous area with mineral rich deposits, which were captured by Germany. And France wanted these two areas to be brought back to France. That's why France is waiting for a war. And this war between Austria, Hungary, and Serbia provided a good opportunity for the French people to enter into the war against Germany. This is how France entered into the war to recapture its Alsace-Lorraine areas from Germany. And likewise, USA also entered into the war. When the ship of USA, Lusitania, was submerged by the German forces, there was a hue and cry, and there was a public outcry in USA. And they have also for some time curtailed the peace efforts of Woodrow Wilson for the end of the war. And Woodrow Wilson was quite indifferent for some time and entered into the war. And as a result, USA also entered into the war as a protest against the submerging of its flight, the Lusitania, into North Atlantic Ocean by German forces. So this is how there are various reasons for Austria-Hungary, Serbia, Russia, England, France, and USA, and likewise Turkey for entering into the war. These countries entered into the war. There are many causes for the war, First World War. Causes among them being the Franco-Prussian War, where the two areas of France, Alsace-Lorraine, were taken away by Germany, which are very mineral rich, and Germany captured these two areas from France. And France is very eager to re-annex these two areas and make a war with Germany for getting these two areas back. That's the reason. And secondly, the violation of Belgium neutrality. When German forces forcefully entered into Belgium to pass through Belgium and enter into France, Belgium objected to it. In fact, Belgium is a neutral country which cannot side with any other country in the Europe. And when Belgium neutrality was violated by Germany, England entered into the war in favor of Belgium. So this is how Belgium neutrality is also another reason for the war. And the third reason being the Berlin-Baghdad railway line. The German capital Berlin and Turkian capital Baghdad. Germany want to build a 1800 kilometers long railway line between Berlin to Baghdad, so that Germany can easily enter into Asia to progress its merchandise, trade and commerce. And Britain and France suspected that once this railway line is materialized, Germany will become a world-class power and its economic prosperity will trigger animosity in Europe. And that's why Britain and France wanted to halt the proposals for Berlin-Baghdad railway line. So Berlin-Baghdad railway line, the proposals for the line between Germany and Turkey also triggered animosity between Germany and England, Germany and France. So Germany and Turkey, though agreed to lay down the railway line, This was stopped and halted by Britain and France due to their suspicions. This is also another reason for the First World War. As we all know, the immediate reason for the First World War is the shooting down of Austria-Hungarian Prince Francis Ferdinand by Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian national. He shot at the Austria-Hungarian Prince Ferdinand and his wife in Bosnian capital Sarajevo. That has triggered the World War I. And there are many causes like growing militarism, and all the countries have prepared themselves for a world-scale war. First, all the countries thought that it would be a local war, but in course of time, many countries have joined either on the side of Central Powers or on the side of Allied Powers, and it has assumed the proportion of a global war. So this is how a local war has assumed its proportion, larger proportion, and become a world war. So these are very causes. Now let us see what is the impact of World War on international relations. The first and foremost important impact is crumbling down of four major empires. Four major empires of Europe, particularly the German Empire, the Austrian Empire, the Russian Empire, and Turkish Empire. They have crumbled down. All the four dynasties have lost their power, political power to rule over the country. The first empire being, the oldest empire being, the Ottoman Empire of Turkey. The Ottoman Empire of Turkey was held by Sultan Khalifa. So the Sultanate was dismantled and Britain captured Turkey, and it wanted to establish a republic, a Turkish republic, in place of Turkian Empire. And it also wanted to give independence to various nationalities like Serbians, Romanians, Montenegro, Bulgarians, and other nationalities, which are fighting for the right to self-determination and the status of a nation state. So this is how the Turkish Empire is crumbled down. Turkey was also known as the sick man of Europe because all the areas of Turkey wanted to disintegrate Turkey into various nationalities and nation states. So Turkey at any point of time was suffering from insecurity and internal disturbances, political instability during 19th century and first decade, 2 decades of 20th century. That way it is very well known as the sick man of Europe. And the first and foremost empire that crumbled down due to First World War is the Ottoman Empire of Turkey. The second empire that crumbled down is the Austria-Hungarian Empire. The Austria-Hungarian Empire led by the Habsburg dynasty. The Habsburg dynasty led the Austria-Hungarian Empire. And as a result of First World War, Austria and Hungary were separated. Austria became a one nation state and Hungary has become another nation state. And ultimately, the king and queen of Austrian-Hungary, the Habsburg dynasty, have lost their power. This is the second important empire. This is the second oldest empire of Europe. And third empire that crumbled down in Europe is the Romanov dynasty in Russia. Russia achieved socialist revolution in 1917 under Leonid Lenin. And Lenin has achieved revolution well before the end of the First World War. In 1917 itself, Russia has become a socialist state, and the Romanov dynasty in Russia crumbled down due to the political instability of the war in 1917, and socialist forces known as the Bolsheviks. The Bolshevik revolution occurred in 1917. That's called the October Revolution. The October Revolution led by Leonid Lenin succeeded in crumbling down the Romanov dynasty in Russia. So this is the third important empire that crumbled down due to the First World War. So the fourth dynasty, the fourth important empire that crumbled down is the German Empire. Germany was ruled by the Hohenzollern dynasty. The Hohenzollern dynasty, led by William Kaiser, and his successors also was crumbled down due to First World War. So First World War resulted in crumbling down of four important major empires in Europe. They are the Turkish Empire, which is also known as the Ottoman Empire, the Habsburg Empire, called as Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Romanov Empire, called as the Romanov Dynasty of Russia, and the Hohenzollern Empire, called as the German Empire. So these are the four empires that have crumbled down, and as a result, four important republics have also emerged, and some of the areas of these four empires also emerged as fresh nation states with ethnic nationalities claiming the right to self-determination and political independence. So crumbling down of four major empires is the major impact. And second is important impact of the First World War is Paris Peace Treaty. The Paris Peace Treaty was signed between the victorious powers and the defeated powers of the First World War. The victorious powers being France, Britain, Russia, and USA. These are the four victorious powers. And the defeated powers being Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Turkey. So the Paris Peace Treaty, which is directed against Germany, and there is also another treaty called the Treaty of Service and Treaty of Brest-Litovsk Treaty, and various other treaties are also dictated by the victorious powers against the defeated powers. The Paris Peace Treaty, which is also known as the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was dictated against the Germany, and Germany termed it as a very humiliating treaty, and Germany lost one of its major areas to various neighboring countries like Alsace-Lorraine to France, and it has separated Danzig port to Poland and Upper Silesia to other countries. So this is how it has lost 1/6 of its territory to various its neighboring countries as a result of the Paris Peace Treaty. Besides this, Germany was also made responsible for the war, and there is a war guilt clause in Paris Peace Treaty, which made Germany to pay the reparations. Reparations are the fines for the war, as Germany is declared as the war guilt, and Germany was asked to pay the reparation for the First World War to all the victorious powers as a penalty. So that penalty, in a technical word called as reparations. So Germany was forced to pay the reparations to all the victorious powers for waging a war, the First World War, against European powers. So the German Peace Treaty, which is also called as the Paris Peace Treaty, which is also known as the Treaty of Versailles, was signed in a glass castle in Paris called Versailles. Versailles is a palace in France, Paris. So that's why the Paris Peace Treaty, which is also known as the Treaty of Versailles, which was termed later by the Germany as a very humiliating treaty. And this humiliating treaty was signed by Germany with all the victorious powers. Germany being the defeated power of the First World War. It was forced to sign on this treaty, and as a result of this Paris Peace Treaty, Germany has to lost almost 1/6 of its territory, and it is also compelled not to have any militarism in the future. It was asked to surrender all its naval ships. It was also reduced, it has to reduce its military strength by at least half or 30%. And it has also given assurance to the victorious powers that it would also pay reparations for the coming 10 years or 15 years for the damages that it has caused due to the waging of war against the victorious powers. So this is how the Paris Peace Treaty was signed by the victorious powers against the defeated powers, and Germany was targeted for this, and Germany was made responsible for this, and this is called as the Paris Peace Treaty. And likewise, Establishment of League of Nations is another important impact after First World War. For the first time in human history, a world-class government, a world-level government to prevent any further world war in future is established. That is called as the League of Nations. In fact, League of Nations is established with a novel concept called collective security. So all the countries of the world have agreed to have collective security against the mad nations or warmongering nations in future. So this is how League of Nations is established for the first time in human history, and all the European powers are made as the permanent members of the League of Nations Security Council. So all the powerful countries of the world, England, France, Russia, America, and other countries, Japan, China, these countries were made as the powerful countries and member countries, and America was reluctant to join in it. America maintained its isolationism with the world politics for some time, and which has also led to Second World War. The failure of League of Nations has led to the Second World War ultimately, but League of Nations was established as a result of First World War, and League of Nations is considered as the first ever world government to prevent the Second World War, any future wars. So this is an important development that all the countries have agreed upon to establish a world-class government to prevent a future course of war, future war. It may come as a Second World War. So this is called as the League of Nations. And the fourth important impact of the First World War is growth of nationalism in Asia and Africa. There were nationalist movements in Asia, Africa, and various other countries like India, Sri Lanka, Burma, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, North Korea, Korea, Vietnam, and various other countries of the Asia. Likewise in Africa, like Zaire, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Kenya, South Africa, Southwest Africa. It's called Namibia, Zimbabwe, and various other countries. So nationalism and nationalistic tendencies have grown in these areas. During the course of the First World War, Indian youth have actively participated in the First World War, and India has also spent so much of money towards the First World War. But in return, Britain has not given any concessions to India. It has only brought the 1909 Act and 1919 Act to accommodate some of the moderate elements of Congress party into its governments. But nothing worth has happened in the political front in India or in any other country. As a result, nationalist tendencies have grown. Non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement, Quit India movement have risen in India. Likewise, in many countries of the world, many nationalist movements have come. Like in India, Mahatma Gandhi has led a powerful national movement against the British. Likewise, Julius Nyerere, Kenneth Kaunda, Robert Mugabe, Bishop Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, and various other leaders of Asia and Africa led so many powerful movements, nationalist movements in their respective countries. This has forced the colonial countries to think over giving independence, political independence to these countries. Of course, the process of decolonization started only after the Second World War, but the colonial countries for the first time have realized that they can no longer continue as colonial powers, and their colonialism is short-lived, and in future course, it is mandated on their part to give independence to these countries. This is the growth of nationalism and nationalist tendencies and assertion of rights by Asians and Africans, particularly on the right to self-determination and political independence, and their demanding for nation state, the status of a nation state. That forced the colonial masters like Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, and other countries which are having various colonies throughout Asia and Africa, to think it over on providing and granting independence to these countries. So growth of nationalism is also another important aspect, and particularly Asia and Africa, this nationalism has grown. And as a result of First World War, the Great Economic Depression occurred. The Great Economic Depression occurred between 1929 to 1934, and this depression has occurred as a result of halting of economic progress in all these countries. In fact, during the First World War, all the European countries have channelized their revenues and men and material towards the preparation of war material and arms and ammunition. And as a result, all the other industries have fallen down, closed down. As a result, the economic circle is stopped and millions of people have lost their jobs and have become unemployed. As a result, the purchasing power of the middle classes and lower middle classes, workers and working classes is fallen down, and this has not given any impetus for further production, and this has resulted in stoppage of industries. There were no imports and exports. The gold standards have fallen down, and there was no raw material supply from Asian countries and African countries to the industrialized countries. The industrialization is stopped. So this has led to the Great Economic Depression. And all the European powers are pushed to the debt trap. And America became the savior of all the nations. And it has provided debts to all the countries. So this Great Economic Depression has led to millions of people losing their employment opportunities and deindustrialization process. And as a result of First World War, two dictatorships arose in Europe in the interwar period. The first dictatorship is led by Benito Mussolini in Italy. This is called as fascism. And another dictatorship in Germany known as Nazism, led by Adolf Hitler. In fact, Nazism and fascism are the two important dictatorships that crippled the economies of the countries, and these, particularly the Nazism, stopped all the reparations to all the victorious powers of the First World War. And it has also challenged the European powers in America, and it has entered into Second World War. So as a result of the threats and challenges of Adolf Hitler, the Second World War has occurred. And Hitler slowly started expansionism and expanded its empire, and Germany reclaimed all its areas. So this has led to the Second World War. So the rise of dictatorships, one is led by Adolf Hitler, known as Nazism. The other one, known as fascism, led by Benito Mussolini, are the two important dictatorships that have risen and challenged all the other nations of Europe in the world in particular, the world in general, and Europe in particular. So rise of two dictatorships is an important consequence of First World War. And First World War has remained a disaster in human history, with loss of life, displacement, and damages of property. Millions of people have lost their lives. Soldiers, even common people, have lost their lives. And there was large-scale displacement, and millions of people have separated from their families, and families are disintegrated and separated. And some of the families were migrated to the neighboring countries for fear of insecurity. So this is how displacement, loss of life, and damages of property. Millions of pounds of worth property is damaged in almost all the countries of Europe. And other countries also suffered in the process. So this is how loss of life, displacement, and damages of property is also another important impact on international relations due to First World War. So the First World War, as a result of First World War, if we could recapitulate ourselves at the effects of the First World War, The important effect of First World War is the crumbling down of the four major empires: the Ottoman Empire, the Romanov Empire, the Hohenzollern Empire, the Habsburg Empire. The Hohenzollern Empire in Germany, the Habsburg Empire in Austria-Hungary, the Romanov Empire in Russia, the Ottoman Empire in Turkey have crumbled down. This is the first important aspect. And secondly, the First World War has resulted in Paris Peace Treaty, which is also known as the Treaty of Versailles. And this Treaty of Versailles has resulted in a treaty between the victorious powers and defeated powers. And this is directed against Germany. And Germany faced a very humiliating treaty from the victorious powers. And this humiliating treaty targeted Germany, and Germany has lost at least 1/6 of its territory due to the Paris Treaty. And it was asked to pay the reparations worth of £6,000, 6,000 million pounds. So these are called as the penalties, are called as reparations. And Paris Peace Treaty is another important devastating experience that led to Second World War. In fact, the seeds of Second World War are sown in Paris Peace Treaty itself. Paris Peace Treaty is very often described by historians and political scientists as a very humiliating treaty, and it has dictated a treaty against Germany. And Germany, with all its egoism, its all with narrow nationalism, has bounced back to the Second World War and opposed the Paris Peace Treaty. And this is the second impact of the First World War. And thirdly, the First World War has resulted in the establishment of the first ever world government called the League of Nations. League of Nations, for the first time, as a world government, established itself and to prevent, with an aim to prevent the future course of world wars, future world wars. It was established to prevent the Second World War, but it has failed in its objective. A Second World War occurred after 20 years of its formation. That's a different matter. But for the first time in human history, a world government is established to prevent a world-scale war. That is called as League of Nations. And the fourth important aspect of the First World War is growth of nationalism in Asia and Africa. Nationalist tendencies have grown in Asia and Africa, and nationalist movements in various countries demanded the right to self-determination and the status of a nation state, and they are demanding political independence from the colonial masters. So as a result, Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, and other countries, the colonial powers, have realized that for no longer they can remain as colonial masters. At some point of time in the near future, they may have to grant independence to all the Asian countries and African countries. This is the result of the First World War. As a result of First World War, people became assertive of their national status. They demanded the right to self-determination due to the growth of nationalism. So this is an indirect impact of the First World War. And after that, the First World War has also resulted in the rise of two dictatorships, Nazism and fascism. In fact, these two dictatorships arose due to the local conditions. Due to the humiliating treaty called the Treaty of Versailles, Germans wanted to fight back the war, and Adolf Hitler led the movement called Nazism, and this has in course of time attained the status of a dictatorship. And Nazism established its dictatorship under the leadership of Adolf Hitler. And fascism, under the leadership of Benito Mussolini, also established a dictatorship. In fact, Italy wanted to regain its past glory. It's called as irredentism. It wanted to regain its irredentism, but Italy could not benefit much from the First World War, and that's why it regained all its forces and established a dictatorship for itself under the leadership of Benito Mussolini. It's called as fascism. So the rise of fascism and Nazism are become the two milestones in the history of Europe, and which ultimately led to the Second World War. And this dictatorship arose due to the shortcomings of the First World War and the peace treaties of the First World War. And lastly, the First World War also resulted in the loss of lives, loss of the human lives. Millions of people have lost their lives, and millions of people separated from their families, and millions of families have migrated to other countries, the neighboring countries. This is how the First World War have virtually divided the families, disintegrated the families. It has brought huge insecurity into the human lives, and there is loss of properties worth millions of pounds. So these are all the very negative experiences of First World War. One positive silver lining from the First World War is it has brought nationalism, and nationalist movements have occurred in Asia and Africa that led to independence movement in many countries. For example, in India, we have independence movement, a mighty independence movement led by Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, and other great leaders. And likewise, leaders like Julius Nyerere, Kenneth Kaunda, Robert Mugabe, Bishop Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, Sam Nujoma, and these leaders have fought for their political independence in their respective countries. So this is the silver lining of the First World War. And First World War also has brought, for the first time, a world-type government, a world-class government at the world-level government called League of Nations. Though League of Nations by itself failed to prevent the Second World War, but it has become a foundation for the United Nations, for the Organization of United Nations after the Second World War. So friends, these are some of the effects of First World War on international relations. Thank you, friends. Thank you very much.